Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. So I've been getting a lot of questions in English about why I studied Russian, and while I already did a video about this in Russian, which is actually my most popular video, I'm going to try to reiterate all of that in English here today. And since I have a Finnish following now because of all my Finnish videos, I'm going to do my party trick, which I'll start with that because maybe that's more engaging with me speaking Finnish, but then I have a Russian accent in Finnish, which is really problematic because I'm sure a lot of you don't see the Russian comments that I get with, there's a lot of critiquing of my accent when I speak Russian. So I really wish I could transfer this accent over to my Russian speech, but so far I have not figured out how to do that yet. Okay, so I'll start with Mina olen Mikaela, Mina asun Amerikassa, mutta asuin Suomessa 2 vuotta. Okay, I don't know if that's grammatically correct. I don't know what else to say. Yeah, okay. I can do more of that later, but that's all I remember off the top of my head. Alright, so to talk more about why I studied Russian, obviously it's pretty uncommon for Americans to be fairly bilingual in another language unless they had parents who were immigrants and taught them that language. I always joke that one of my biggest regrets in life was not having immigrant parents, even though that obviously doesn't make sense because how would I have controlled that? But I just very desperately always wanted to be able to speak another language. It's kind of funny because my first memories of like making friends in school were like my two best friends in school. One was from India and then the other one was Hispanic. And then I just proceeded to have lots of friends who just weren't typical white Americans like myself. I mean, I still had some, but I wouldn't say it's the majority. I actually have a lot of Russian-speaking friends in the U.S., like either them being heritage speakers or, which is, I guess, basically the level I speak at, is more of a heritage speaker, or just, maybe from other countries. But yeah, I've always had, like, a lot of Russian friends. And so that's kind of where I think my interest in learning Russian came from. The story that I tell in this other video is about how I moved from Maryland to New Jersey when I was about 8 years old, and it was very difficult for me to adjust and make new friends. I think like I made a couple guy friends first, and then they had crushes on me, and I was kind of like freaked out by that. And then I was like, I have no friends that, don't like me. I just want like a female friend. And then finally I made a female friend like 3 years after, maybe 2 to 3 years after I'd already been living in New Jersey. It was like I moved there in 4th grade, and then by 6th grade I made friends with this girl named Christina who had actually been adopted from Russia. And during recess, or I guess like when we would have lunch inside, she would teach us, like me and this one other girl, she would teach the both of us the Russian alphabet, like the Cyrillic alphabet. And I remember actually like getting yelled at by the teacher for this because it was like, you're supposed to be playing. And I'm like, yeah, this is playing. Like I'm learning another alphabet. So then I think after that, I just really always wanted to learn Russian because I just thought it was interesting. But as I say in my Russian video, I'm not okay, this doesn't translate well into English, but like a person who's good at teaching themselves something. Like I always rely on having a lot of structure. So I did pay for Russian lessons for a while, and I was always looking for ways to get Russian classes funded for me, which is how I ended up going and participating in these scholarships where I was abroad, like particularly the Boren Scholarship, which I had to study Russian in Kyrgyzstan. So after Christina, I did study Spanish for a long time because I'd say Spanish is the most accessible second language in the US besides, well, Russian is actually like fairly accessible depending on what region you're in. So in the Northeast, where I'm from, New Jersey, we do have quite a few Russian people. Same thing, like New York, Brighton Beach. People were asking me about Brighton Beach actually in some of my comments on the Russian video. I have gone there. I can talk more about that later because I think that would be funny. Yeah, people there don't really speak English. There are a lot of people, like in New York, who are Russian speakers who just never learn English because they don't need to. But, you see that with the different Hispanic communities as well. Okay, so I did learn Spanish for a while, and I decided that I wasn't really that into the culture. Like, they're very into dancing, and it didn't suit me. And then I started learning Russian. I didn't immediately know, like, oh, I'm really going to fit in with that culture. I was just like, all right, I, want to try something else. I liked that Russian was more challenging. It had different alphabet. It was, interesting. Actually, fun fact, by the time that I got barely proficient in Russian, I want to say like 5 years into me studying Russian, then I started studying Arabic, and I actually studied Arabic for 3 years. So I can still read and write and say random things in Arabic like Darstu fil Jamia. Yeah, that means I studied at the university. I don't know whatever. I'll do a video of me speaking a lot of other languages later because I think that would be kind of funny as well. All right, so I started studying Russian as soon as I could, which was not in high school. I stuck with Spanish like until I went to college, community college, which is where I went first. It's kind of like if you're Finnish and you're watching this, it's sort of like ammattikorkeakoulu, but it's for 2 years and you don't get a bachelor's after it. It's just you would have to transfer to a 4-year university to get your bachelor's, but it's cheaper. They're not as hard to get into. I mean, that had nothing to do with anything, but it was free for me, and I was looking for a free way to educate myself, so I started there before I transferred to Rutgers University, which is a state university of New Jersey. But through these educational opportunities, I had the opportunity to keep learning Russian, which was a language I'd been interested in since childhood. So I started with it I always wanted to learn French as well. And I started with Russian for my first semester in community college. No, sorry, that's a lie. I started with French for my first semester. Then I took a break. And I remember I was like sad during that break. And I was like, I always wanted to take a language because I love languages. Then I started taking Russian. And I thought I was going to go back to French. But then I forgot French. And then there were these two students. One was like this 30-year-old guy. I was like, 18 at the time. The other one was this 50-year-old woman. And they both really, really badly wanted to have the second Russian class run. So even though there were only 3 of us in the sequel to the first Russian class, they somehow actually got it to run. And I was like, wow, they put in all this work. I did none of the work. Usually I'm the one who does stuff like that and tries to, harass the people at the university to get me something that I want. That's pretty common in the US. I know, not in Finland. Somebody says no, and they say no, you don't try again. But in the US, not the case. So they already fought for the class. I was like, all right, fine, I'm going to take it. And then I just kind of kept going. Like, I remember asking my dad, like, hey, can I keep studying Russian? And he's like, well, I think if you're going to be a business person, you should really study Chinese. I think that would make more sense. But if you want to keep studying Russian, sure. And I like studying languages that are widely spoken and generally very applicable. Like, Spanish is a very widely spoken language. So is Russian, thanks to the Soviet Union, because that was a thing. And a lot of those people do still speak Russian. So Russian is a very useful language. I was studying French, and then working at a restaurant where I still work sometimes. I never met any French speakers, but I kept meeting Russian speakers. I was like, okay, this is the language to go with. This is much more versatile than French. So I stuck with Russian. I continued with Russian even while I was at NASA. Because I was at NASA every semester from 2017 to 2019. Yes, I'm going to do a separate video about me talking about my experience at NASA. I already did one of those in Russian, and people told me it was a little bit boring, so I'll try to make it more interesting. But when I was at NASA in 2017, I had a private tutor. Then summer 2017, I went to Kyrgyzstan and studied Russian there. And then in 2018, in the summer, I went to Armenia and studied Russian there. Then I went back to Kyrgyzstan starting in September 2019, where I stayed until COVID happened, and then I went back to the US. But so I would say, yeah, Christina was definitely the catalyst of like, oh, I want to study another language, and like, this girl like taught me this language, and that's where the interest came from. But I would say the continued interest was, and this ties into the NASA story, was that I went to go visit NASA when I was still at community college in like 2014, and I thought it was so cool. And like there were ways that I saw that Russian was being used. So I had just started studying Russian. Like I had only gone through 1 semester of it, I guess, and I'm seeing like, all these spacesuits with Russian letters and like the mock-up of the International Space Station, and I'm like, wow, I can read this. This is so cool. Like maybe I could actually use this at work if I worked for NASA. And I thought that like, oh, if I study Russian, they're definitely going to accept me as an intern, and then, I'm going to be able to use Russian at NASA. So I did get accepted as an intern. However, I spent a lot of my internship like going around talking to different managers and being like, hey, I speak Russian and like I want to use it for my job. What can I do? And they're like, yeah, if you want to go be the procurement person who literally works in Russia, then you can do that. Like you have like a NASA person working in Russia. I don't know if that person has since gotten removed. I don't know. That information I don't know. I'd have to ask. But yeah, so that was one of the options. But I was like, okay, I don't know if that's exactly it, but whatever. So I ended up, leaving NASA ultimately because I had seen a lot of things where people who were working for NASA but then had something they're very passionate about. So like, what's his name? Randall Munroe, I think is his name, who does the XKCD comic. he left NASA to do the XKCD comic full time. And then there's another guy, I remember seeing this when I was in an airport one time, this guy who like did origami and then started something with origami which took off, so he left NASA, I think he was close to retiring, to go do this origami thing full time. So I was like, you know what, NASA's always going to be here, and it's either I take this scholarship to study Russian, it's like now or never, because the way it worked was the Boren Scholarship, because it's a government-funded, U.S. government-funded scholarship, it's a conflict of interest to continue being associated with the U.S. government, because every time I left NASA, I didn't actually leave the organization fully. I was always in leave without pay status. I was still a federal employee. That's pretty standard for if you're in a pathways program is what it's called. So yeah, I left NASA to go study Russian because I decided I was more passionate about that. And even though I didn't exactly, and I still have not found a way to use Russian to make a living, to be clear, I actually just use it more as a hobby because I found that I have very enjoyable interactions with people in Russian. I have a lot of really good Russian speaking friends. Like I feel like I have a very good quality of friendship or like relationships with these people who speak Russian, and it just I guess became a part of my identity in that way. Even though I say I'm like kind of I'm lazy with Russian, I don't really like watch a lot of things in Russian or read a lot of things in Russian, but I do speak Russian quite a bit. Like I always find people to speak Russian with in terms of friends or regularly visiting places where I'm able to use Russian. Like I was going back to Kyrgyzstan maybe every year for years until the last couple of years because it's gotten a little bit more complicated with me going back and forth to Finland. But in Finland, I speak Russian regularly when I'm here as well. So that's everything that I can think of for why I studied Russian, besides the fact that it just kind of emerged as a hobby and an interest. And I had such good experiences being in Kyrgyzstan, being in Armenia, got so much attention, as you may or may not see reflected in my Russian videos, for being an American speaking Russian and just having such good quality of interactions with people and experiencing a type of joy that maybe I can't experience when I'm speaking English. So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the joke is like, oh, you're American, you speak Russian, you're a spy. And I made a video about why I don't want to be a spy, and then I talked about the Edward Snowden documentary, because it's like, I am not okay with the idea that, if you're supporting the Department of Defense or any of these other like intelligence agencies, that you can be blood guilty and potentially responsible for somebody else potentially dying who is like a civilian. I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. Everybody has their own opinions on how to feel about that, and that's fine. But I don't think that, any amount of money would make me want to do those things. That's just a personal value. So yeah, Russian, it's just, at this point, it's a hobby. There were a lot of things that inspired me to study it. First off was my friend Christina. Next off was wanting to work at NASA. Then when that already came and went, now it's just a hobby that I use, and it's a part of who I am at this point. And it's very weird and confusing to explain to people. No, I don't have any relatives who speak Russian. I'm the only person in my family who speaks Russian, and I speak at a fairly proficient level because of all the time I've spent abroad. But yes, I still have so much to learn and accomplish in terms of improving my language skills. I'm at a C1 level, and I would love to get to C2. I have no idea what I would have to do to get to that level, do a lot of work. But yeah, I spent spent a year and a half studying Finnish. I spent 2 years studying Arabic. I studied lots of other languages. I spent a semester studying German. I spent a semester studying French. I still speak Spanish very poorly. I studied a little Kyrgyz while I was there. Studied a little Armenian while I was there. I know that there are other ones that I can't think of right now. I studied Chinese for like a hot second, and then I was like, this is really a lot of work. So that's everything that I have today. I hope that answered that question and that's interesting enough, because sometimes I feel like I make these videos and then people are like, no, you didn't answer my question. So if not, just ask the question again. I'll try to get to it in the next video. And I guess that's everything. I will make a NASA video soon. I have to get pictures together for that. I think I've partially done that. So that will be the next one. And I hope this was interesting, and I'm happy that some people are enjoying my English content because it's way less work for me than the Russian ones, even though I love doing the Russian ones too. So thank you again, everybody, and until tomorrow or the next day, we'll see what happens. All right, bye.